Hello and welcome to IR Thinker, where international affairs are discussed. I'm Martin Zupko. Today we're going to speak about the Qatari soft power. Qatar is in a center of interest when it comes to soft power. We know about Qatar organizing sport events, we know about Al Jazeera, we know about diplomatic negotiations led by Qatar. So I think it's a very interesting topic. And also, at the moment, despite the unpleasant situation in the Middle East, I mean the war between Israel and Hamas, there is also Qatar involved in negotiation. So I want to clarify why Qatar was the Qatari position in the soft power. And therefore, my guest today is Ariel Admoni. Ariel, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Ariel is a PhD candidate at Bar Ilan University, and Ariel has also published already in many journals, Contemporary Review of the Middle East Policy, Asian Journal of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies. Ariel is focusing on Qatar. Ariel is also focusing not only on Qatar as one country, but in a broader geopolitical context. So I think Ariel will tell us a few interesting things about Qatar today. But let's start with the first question. Some people are not 100% sure what's the regime of Qatar. So let's clarify, what's the regime in Qatar like?
So thank you for having me. When we talk about Qatar, we need to remember it's a small emirate in the Persian Gulf or Arab Gulf that is under the ruling of Al Thani family. That was a family that ruled the emirate since 1851, and this is a hereditary rule that the title of the Emir, the head of the state. It's like monarchy. When you pass it along, the king is not the head of the state, but the Emir. Sometimes you hear the title Sheikh. And the Emir is the one that's in charge. It's not a democracy. Sometimes there are bodies in the government, some council or shura council that some of the members are elected by the Qatari public, and it's important to note that it's the Qatari public, not the fact that there's a very large foreign population there. And anyway, the state is not a democracy, but there are some elements that Qatar tried to adapt itself to the democratic system, sometimes from a genuine care, and sometimes, most of the times, for PR reasons.
In what ways might Qatar's active mediation in conflicts be viewed as a strategic maneuver within the broader geopolitical landscape when we speak about the Middle East? What are the potential challenge for the Qatar, and how this influence the traditional dynamics in the Middle East?
I think that what I said before about the PR aspect and the genuine aspect is an important distinction when we talk about Qatar, because most of their, let's say, policy or acts in foreign affairs sometimes will be described in both terms. Sometimes we can see it in the aspect of PR reasons. For an example, the mediation process, especially in the Middle East, is presented as the country that want to bring stability and peace around the world, and we see it already in this war, for the fact that Qatar tried to present itself as the state who will bring tranquility to the place, to the Middle East and Israel and Gaza. And in the first humanitarian pause that Qatar mediated, some newspaper editors that are pro-government, of course, even claim that Qatar deserve a Nobel Peace for a Nobel Award for Peace because they bring the quiet to the Middle East. But in the essence, we need to remember that Qatar doing itself from geopolitical strategic reasons, And I think that the mediation is an important tool of Qatari regime to highlight its importance and to gain influence in the region. This is why we see it in this war, Israel and Hamas, the fact that both sides need Qatar. And we see it around the world in many places. We see it in Russia, Ukraine. They mediate about the hostages also there. During the war and before it, they mediate between the Venezuela and the US, between Iran and the US. In Africa, they were also active in this mediation. And the fact that most of the world actually turn to Qatar when we talk about mediation. And this is why this gave Qatar an important role or position or place in the global arena. And for that reason, it's, as you said in your question, an important change for the traditional dynamics. Because let's say until the 1990s, Qatar was a place, one article even say that Qatar didn't have foreign policy. This is not true, but still, it's an example to the fact that Qatar, until the 1990s, is not in the focus of the world, and especially is not the focus of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. And right now, we can say that the fact that Qatar, among other things, mediate between a lot of regional actors is transform Qatar into a state that the GCC in particular and the Middle East in the broader sense must to consider when they talk about international policy.
I'm glad you mentioned Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC. So naturally, I have two questions following your talk. The first one, what is the position of Qatar in this organization at the moment? And the second question, if Qatar is negotiating, why other countries are not negotiating as Qatar? So for instance, is there any competition between Qatar and Saudi Arabia or UAE or different countries? Because many people think why Qatar is negotiating almost everywhere, as you correctly pointed out. So this nature of negotiating comes from where?
There is an Islamic story that Qatar like to reiterate and say that there was a story about Mecca and the fact that the Prophet want to position the black stone, and the tribes were looking to his help to mediate between the different sides. This is an Islamic explanation, a nice one, and but in the essence, mediation is important to highlight the importance of Qatar to both sides. Now, let's neglect for a second the Israel-Hamas. Let's go to Russia-Ukraine. Russia-Ukraine, both of them needed Qatar to mediate on their behalf to bring Ukrainian kids, to help Russia in their foreign policy. That there were several meetings between the Russian leadership and the Qatari leadership. And if we talk about Russia, and it's an example to the fact that it's not, Qatar is not the only one. I mean, right just before a week, the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates, pronounced that they also helped in mediation to release Ukrainian kids. Saudi Arabia also held a summit to mediate between the sides. So I think that, let's say, the big states, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, to some extent Kuwait, but again, I'm specialized in Qatar, so I'm not gonna specify about other states. But there is, like you say, kind of a race between every state, how they gain more influence. In mediation, it's important tool for the GCC states every state in its own game and its own method. The Qatari bring that to an art form, because Qatar was, let's say, sometimes real politic in the Hamas Israel is an example to the fact that both sides are sometimes angry about the Qatari methods or the Qatari MO, because it's, let's say, it's not a pragmatistic one, but even a cynical one. You aid who you want, but at the same time you can dictate them, but at the same time it's not a, let's say, a fond relationship. It's actually a more cynical, realpolitik one, and this is why Qatar can allow itself at the same time talk with China, the US, the Hamas, the Taliban, and Iran, and this is why it sometimes poses a danger to Qatar, because when you are not committed to any side, to any alliance, so maybe at the end of the day, nobody gonna want to help you.
Yeah, and I think we saw this when there was the crisis. You remember the times when Qatar was accused of supporting terrorism. So we had like 4 years, I think 2017, 20 or 21, when Qatar wasn't in a position of favor of other countries, because there was that crisis and countries were divided. So that's interesting point. And Ariel, when Qatar is negotiating, is it the family involved of Emir, or do they have some sort of professional diplomatic corps, or how does it work?
There is a great expression in the US, those who speak don't know, and those who know don't speak. And I think that in the GCC and Qatar especially, this is a very important one to remember. But what we can tell, that the fact that the Qatari elite or the Al-Thani family is directly involved in the mediation. I mean, the chief negotiator is from the Al-Khulaifi state. He is the Minister of State. But in the matter of fact, when you need to close the deal, we can see it right now in the fact that both in Russia and Ukraine, both in Israel and Hamas, the Qatari PM, Mohammed bin Abd al-Rahman al-Thani, was the one that led the charge. He was the one that visited the closet room, and sometimes he will be escorted with the chief of intelligence, but not just the Emir, but strong members of the Al-Thani family and close strong family, other families in Qatar will be involved directly in this negotiation.
Right. We also know about the Qatari foreign aid. And this aid is going to many countries. So what's your opinion about the honesty of this humanitarian aid or foreign aid and the geopolitical implications of Qatari government?
As I said in the beginning, there is a distinction in Qatar between PR and genuine and real issues. And the fact that foreign aid is it's an excellent example to this distinction, because Qatar presents itself as a state that donate to a lot of causes that some of them the West more fond of, and some of them the West didn't dislike. And we need to remember this method is existed in Qatar for many years. I mean, we in the situation of Israel, we can see the fact that Qatar donates money to UNRWA, or the Palestinian organization, from the 1950s. Now, there wasn't a state already, there wasn't a state then, but the Emir then, Sheikh Ali, already gave donation, and the fact that it's look like Qatar want to benefit or donate money in the name of charity, And we need to remember that in Qatar, we need to also distinct between the Qatari regime and Qatari families or Qatari population. The Qatari population can donate money on the base of zakat, the base of Islamic charity, and they can donate this money to organization like Palestinian one in the name of religious edicts. But when we look for Qatar, the main reason is to gain influence. When you donate money to such many places and you donate and you are present there, in the fact that in Qatar, we see the fact they donate a lot of to Gaza Strip. And there are a lot of Gazans that knows that there was a graffiti that was sprayed on in Gaza about Sheikh Tamim and the current Emir and his father, Sheikh Hamad, that he was one of the few leaders that actually visit Gaza. And this kind of involvement can, in the PR reasons, present Qatar as an important role and beneficial, etc. But in the essence, they look for influence in the region by its money.
And is there any evaluation or assessment of this aid? Like, how successful is this aid?
It's difficult to say because there is no accountability to where the money goes. I mean, for an example, Israel right now is exposing tunnels in Gaza. And there was a speculation about how Hamas built these tunnels. And there were Qatari architects in this decade that entered Gaza, and the media was reported it. And the fact that the real reason, or let's say the reason they gave at the time, was to help to establish help to the locals. But we can safely assume they help also on the tunnels. So it's hard to say when we talk about Qatar how much the citizens are favorites. Most of the time they're giving money, so nobody can oppose it. But when the prices came, when the fact that there are a situation in Gaza or other places that the Qatari involvement seems too much or cause problems in the state, so this is when we're gonna see the problems arise, and this is when we let's say examine if the Qatari help is actually helping or just an instrument that bothered the locals. Most of the times I can say that because Qatar try to influence from afar, it's perceived in a good manner.
When we speak about the Qatari soft power, we must mention gas and energy, because that's a significant income for Qatar. So how do you see the energy politics and Qatar's gas export in the major power politics?
So a quick review, if I may. When we talk about the energy kingdoms in the Gulf, as one book described them, most of them have oils, and Qatar also have oil. That was an important resource that helped the Qatari economy. But in the 1990s, they discovered the gas, and from the first, let's say, production of the gas, it was a political question. For an example, the North gas field is joined by Qatar and Iran. So this is why from the beginning, you have to consider geostrategic and political considerations. The gas actually helped Qatar in many realms that in the beginning nobody thought about. For an example, there was during this war, there were speculation, fake news one speculation, but still, about embargo of gas by Qatar. It's not going to happen, but there were reports about it. Another aspect is the fact that Qatar can present itself as important alternative. For an example, during the war in Russia and Ukraine, Russia seems unfavorable to some states. For an example, Germany preferred the Qatari gas over the Russian gas. So these are the examples that nobody thought of. But in more imminent thinking, we need to think that Qatar declare that until the end of the decade, they will distribute 40% of the energy worldwide. And during this war, even when there was a harsh criticism towards Qatar, they signed long gas deals with France, Italy, Bangladesh just a week ago. And they make sure these deals will be long-term for 27 years, in Bangladesh case, 15 years. So when, if let's say the atmosphere will be against them, it's not going to help France because they already signed the deal. And in the same time, one other deal for 27 years was with China. So we are not, again, aligned to any sign. We are not committed to any aspect. We invested in the US gas. We have deals with the Western, like Germany, like France, like Italy, with Asia, with Bangladesh, and with China. So this is how we can use our gas to highlight the fact that nobody can without us.
So that makes the Qatari soft power actually quite strong. Because imagine that Qatar is financing a foundation in France or China or somewhere in the world, and if there is a trouble or problem, Qatar can argue with the energy deal. You know that we have a deal for energy, so maybe that makes Qatar a bit less criticized internationally. What do you think?
Totally. I mean, there was an example of the beginning of the war, and day 2 or 3 of the war, the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, called to sanction Qatar. Called to sanction Qatar for the reason they host the Hamas leadership. And just 2 weeks later, the same Prime Minister thanked Qatari efforts with the mediation. And just a week ago, his deputy visited Qatar for a long trip. There he spoke about the strong investments of Qatar in the UK. And in UK, you can see it, the fact that some politicians even told me that you cannot speak about, let's say, sever Qatar, ties with Qatar or cut them off, as many said. Because when you talk about cut them off, you need to think the fact that invested in the water companies, in football, in so many realms that if you are gonna cut Qatar off, you have a problem because the economy is not gonna be the same. This is why the slogans in many places in the West, also in the US, that call the fact that the relation with Qatar will never be the same after October 7th. Let's say I'm skeptical. Let's say I'm skeptical because many of the states needed them, and they need them in so many areas. So this is why it's going to be problematic to talk about Qatar as a state that you just can ignore or treat like an enemy.
Yeah, and maybe you remember when the football championship was in Qatar, and we read many articles, especially from the European Union, criticizing Qatar for human rights, for workers, violations in Qatar, and all those things. But despite that criticism, those member states, they signed many deals with Qatar. And even the European Union was not against importing Qatari gas to European Union. when the war in Ukraine started. So I think in some way the energy deals, they help to protect Qatar, to put Qatar into some sort of capsule. I think that's quite significant when it comes to soft power as well.
I think that what is significant about the Qatari policy, that they learn from previous cases. I mean, the Saudis are in the past was dependent on their energy status or energy power. But Qatar actually used the money to establish investment authority and to invest in vast numbers of ventures and initiatives in many realms. So this is why even, I don't know, tomorrow we're gonna, all of us gonna move to energy by the sun, Qatar will still be a relevant factor. This is how, and we can see the fact that the gas has actually helped Qatar to promote initiatives also in the green agenda, or let's say the sustainability politics. So I think that what was very sophisticated about the Qatari policy, they didn't rely on one source or one method or one policy. They tried to do it all at once, and sometimes it didn't work, but most of the times it's bear fruit.
And as you study Qatar, can you tell us a little bit about approach to the renewable energies? For instance, wind, solar, hydro. How is Qatar position itself to these new sources of energy? Because as you said, they have gas, they have oil, that's all right. But do they think in the future in these terms?
First, I must admit that my knowledge is not enough about this, but what can I can say briefly. First is a desert state. So this is why they aware to the situation and they talking about it. But here the distinction made the scholars uncomfortable, because when we talk about the distinction between the PR and the essence, it seems most of the times that the Qatari initiatives are mainly on the PR side. The fact that there were events with members of the elective council to plant trees and to initiative to water preserve. But again, I don't have a specified knowledge on this subject, but I think that we need to take it under advisement that some of the projects, the initiatives that the Qatari proclaim, it's mainly for PR reasons.
The next chapter is also real estate. We know that Qatar invests a lot, in real estate abroad. How significant is this pillar of the soft power for Qatar?
I think that we have an example from Hamad bin Jassem. Hamad bin Jassem was the foreign minister and prime minister in the, let's say, formative years of the Hamad administration. He was the architect of the Qatari policy that now it's so successful. And Hamad bin Jassem, and that many football fans will learn to who is it by the fact that he is the father of Jassim bin Hamad, the one that there was speculation about buying Manchester United. And his father, the one I'm talking about, is actually the one that admitted in an interview that he was the finance aspect behind the deal. And Hamad bin Jassem, as prime minister and foreign minister, also buying a lot of real estate. There is articles about him, and he called the man who bought half of London. And it's not just him, there are others, Qatari businessmen that bought real estate in London. There are also heavy investments of Qatar in the in US infrastructure. There was a heavy investments of Qatar in US infrastructure. And let's give just a minor example. In the second week of the war, there was let's say a resentment in Israel when in December 18, in Qatari National Day, the Empire State Building was in the lights of the maroon flag of Qatar.
Okay.
And there were Israeli websites and media users that said how it's possible that a state that support Hamas financially, diplomacy, and etc. Its flag is presented on the Empire State Building. But when you look for the investment in this Empire State Building, you see that Qatar is invested in this realm. So I think that real estate is a Qatari way to have not boots on the ground, but a foot on the ground. The fact that everybody needs me and we are here. There was some American activist that do his support in Israel, tried to protest the fact that Harrods, a hotel in his street, was by Qatari ownership. And it's just the minor examples to the fact then that, again, you can't speak about Qatar is cut off when you think that there are buildings that are going to be vacant, there are deals that are going to be not implemented. So I think that real estate is an example, let's say a physical one, to the Qatari importance.
Ariel, let's speak a little bit about culture and education. In recent years, we see many investments coming from Qatar, and Qatar supports various foundations, museums, and donates to this and that. So this is quite interesting. And the second one is so-called educational city that Qatar developed and attracted some foreign universities. So now, Qatar is also presenting itself as an educational hub. And this hub was mainly built by Western standards. We know how for instance, Rand Corporation was involved in the developing of the educational sector, but also the Western universities that came to Qatar. So how do you understand culture and education when we speak about the soft power of Qatar?
There is a saying in Israel of one foreign minister, Abba Eban, a familiar one, that in Israel there isn't a foreign policy, there is just domestic policy. He talked about the fact that many foreign policies dictated by political consideration. I think in Qatar you need to say the opposite. Okay. Sometimes it seems there is no domestic policy, or let's say a consideration of the population, and more about the fact that how Qatar represented to the world. For an example, the fact that culture and education is sometimes more important to the Qataris than what's happened in the state itself. Some of the education initiative and some of the cultural initiatives were at odds with the Qatari population. For an example, at the beginning of 2000, there was Oktoberfest in some of the hotels in Qatar. And Oktoberfest is a lot of beer. And there was criticism among Qataris that say, why there is alcohol in our state? And the fact that the same criticism was sounded by the Qatari population when they saw Western norms on their soil, and the fact that there were universities that was mixed gender. a method that's still not accepted in Qatar. So this is why we can see Texas A&M, we see Georgetown, that all of them is run by Western norms. You can see girls without headscarf. You can see the fact there are girls and boys go together. And there were Qatari residents that even, let's say quietly, because they're afraid it's not a democracy again, but ask why. Why this state is prefer the Westerns over us? And it was in so many places, there was a online campaign against the fact that Qatar Airways for a short period of time sold alcohol on the planes. And they even disable an app to know where the direction to Mecca. And these are the minor example to the fact that Qatar, in order to promote its image, in order to extract tourism or attract Westerns fond of them, changed the state from within in a manner that sometimes was too fast for the locals. And this struggle or this debate is still going on.
So that means that a soft power might have like two sides. One side is for abroad, for foreigners, and the second side is for local people who might be, as you said, a bit of disappointed, by the approach of Qatar.
Exactly. For an example, there were the mother of the Emir, Sheikh Hamoza, an important figure in the Qatari administration, still active today, tried to explain why Qatar, although these problems, opened this university. And she said in an interview in English that she felt ashamed that her sons is receiving a not good enough education, and this is why their heritage is actually in a problem place. Their heritage is actually seems less vis-a-vis the West. But you can hear the problem in her explanation. I mean, she talked about the fact that the Qatari legacy is not well respected, and the solution for that was to bring foreign education. I mean, it's not comparable, the problem and the solution. So you can say it's apologetic. In the matter of fact, the fact that Qatar opened universities and allowed so many initiatives wasn't for the population, but it was for PR reasons and from outside observers, not from the local one.
And is this educational city successful as a project?
Yeah, it's gained a lot of attention, international attention. A lot of academic institutions are brought to there, and also benefit from the Qatari assistance in their home state. And the fact that Qatar, again, when we talk about the fact that he used it for political reasons, we can see it, let's say like that. Sometimes when Qatar want to vocal opinion that is not good for their intentions, they will use the academic institutions. For an example, the fact that there was, let's say, resentment in Qatar when the US veto the resolution in the Security Council of the UN. And Qatar itself chose to, let's say, not speak and try to contain itself, but the Doha Forum, academic and political forum that were in Doha, and American universities, on the under the cover of academic freedom, they can allow itself to criticize the US in a manner the Qatari leadership itself didn't want to say because it seemed disrespectful toward Washington. So I think that, again, it's an example to the sophisticated policy of Qatar that the soft power is can be converted to immediate political gains.
Right. Ariel, what about the World Championship? After some time, we can evaluate it a little bit. How did it help to Qatar? And are there any implications? So, for instance, Qatar will host different events, I mean, the world or global events for sport. And what can we say about this? Because during the championship, as I said, we were receiving negative and positive comments from different commentators and experts. But what about now, after the event?
I think that it's important to note that before the World Cup, there were a lot of people that didn't know where Qatar is. There was an article in the beginning of the first decade, 2003 or 4 or 5, that was actually where is Qatar? Where is Qatar, and why everybody gonna know it? And this article was right on point because just before 3 months, the Qatari tourism agency proclaimed that the tourism in the state was jumping due to the World Cup. And again, we need to remember the distinction between the essence and the PR, and the World Cup was another excellent example because they used the World Cup to promote a progressive image of Doha, and there were problems along the way. For example, LGBT rights, alcohol, that they needed to tiptoe between the population and the foreign media. And the fact that the World Cup brought, all in all, great support to Qatar, the fact that most of the GCC was amazed by the fact that this tiny emirate was suppressed them. And now when Saudi Arabia is about to host maybe the last or let's say the 2 tournaments, it's not a unique one because Qatar led the way. And Qatar wants this image to stay. We are leading the way. This is why the Qatari regime, from the inception of the campaign to host the World Cup, try to highlight the fact that we are here to present the Arab, not the Qataris, the Arab. We see it in the fact that before the champion, Qatari Emir pronounced in a meeting with Putin that it's gonna be the champion of all Arabs. The fact that the cup was designed in a manner that will be resembled Arabic characteristics. In the fact that the Qatari mascot for the games, the laib, as they call it in Arabic, the player, was with kufiyah and everything. And the fact that I think that everyone remember the finish line and the final, when Lionel Messi is dressed by the Emir with the traditional robe or traditional clothes, this is a strong message to the world. First we're here, first we're Arab, and everything is happening from this tiny place. And we're gonna set the tone to the rest of the world that if you are gonna speak about the Middle East, you have to consider us. You have to consider what Qatar says.
I also think that it was quite a successful move for Qatar that Lionel Messi accepted this, because not everyone is accepting, to take the dress or traditional dress from different countries. So I think this sort of like that little detail that Qatar was able to organize this in this way is strategic for me, because I saw many world championships in various sports, but it's not often that you can see the winner, walking in the traditional dress of the host country. So I think this is a little detail, but it tells the story.
If can I add the fact that the final was on December 18th. And as many football viewers know, the tournament wasn't supposed to be in those months because
Yes.
they had weather. And when Qatar moved the dates, it not was just for weather, but the final itself was designated to the Qatari National Day. So in the Day of Independence, the Qatari National Day, let's say the most famous football player in the world is receiving a cup from the Emir. I mean, the image that was presented to the world was overwhelming in so many little details that the Qatari regime I say it with respect. The fact that Qatar was designed or the architects of very organized details until the little ones.
Ariel, the next pillar of the soft power of Qatar is 100% Al Jazeera. Because Al Jazeera is everywhere. You can watch Al Jazeera over the internet, on YouTube. And Al Jazeera has many, let's say, shows or talk shows where you can see the analysis, of different events, different international issues. There are many experts speaking on Al Jazeera. Some of the scholars they put to the CV that they were shown on Al Jazeera as well. So what's your opinion about the impact of Al Jazeera as a pillar of the soft power of Qatar?
It's a very important one, not just to the world, but also to Qatar. I mean, from the beginning of the station, we talk about the fact that in 1995, Sheikh Hamad take the states to a different approach. His father was trying to be independence, but it was in baby steps. Sheikh Hamad in 1995 tried to transform the state into the situation we're seeing today. And he used many instruments. The most important one was Al Jazeera. Just one year after he rose to power, he opened this broadcast. And the fact that first we need to listen to the name, Al Jazeera. In Arabic, it means the peninsula. It's a short to Shiba Al Jazeera, the peninsula. And everyone that's gone, when they hear this chapter, to Google Maps, they're going to see that if you are looking to Arabian Peninsula, the peninsula is the Arabian Peninsula. It's not the Qatari one. But Qatar, with this station, was able to project an image that the important peninsula, it's ours. This little thumb is the strongest or most influential peninsula. And Al Jazeera, from its inception, tried to highlight not Qatar, but the fact that everyone, in the end of the day, gonna need Qatar. There was a visit of Hosni Mubarak, the ex-Egyptian president, in Doha one year. And he was traveling in Doha, and he saw the building of Al Jazeera. And he said, I didn't understand our building that sits in the size of average Cairo hotel is causing me so much problems around the world. And Mubarak know what he's talking about. In Egypt, most of the protest against Mubarak was fueled by Al Jazeera talk show, experts, and like the host country itself, Al Jazeera is care more about the ratings or the PR than the essence itself. It seems that sometimes Al Jazeera was ready to cause problems in the world, and sometimes it was willingly and they chose to cause problems. Sometimes, and this is one that was very shocking to Israel, the fact that in the beginning of the war, there was a demonstration in front of the Qatari embassy in London for the release of the hostages, and Al Jazeera covered it. Now, Al Jazeera didn't cover and don't cover these days what's happening in Qatar, especially not in negative terms. But anyway, the fact that all the world talking about that was a cause to Al Jazeera to broadcast the fact that it was a demonstration against Qatari embassy. And again, it's sometimes in Qatar and Al Jazeera, the PR aspect is defeating the essential one, or the more what seems to other more important.
Ariel, there is one question from my students. When we speak about Al Jazeera, and when you watch Al Jazeera, there is always written on YouTube, or when you have different platforms, that this is like state-sponsored TV or channel or TV show. And students, they ask, how does Qatar face that criticism? That, some people say, don't watch Al Jazeera, it's only propaganda. And there is the second camp which says Al Jazeera is okay, and because there are many independent shows and experts speaking on Al Jazeera. So for students, what would be your message? How to take Al Jazeera when you're watching it, or when you're taking some knowledge from Al Jazeera?
First, they're right. Al Jazeera is funded and owned by Al Thani family. And some of, actually all the managers of the broadcast or the station was appointed by Qatari government. Even when they bring experts from outside, 90% of the times, it's gonna be in accordance to the Qatari foreign policy. There are, as I said, with the demonstration and other little examples, situations when raiding win policy objectives, but in the end of the day, Al Jazeera, it's not a trusted broadcast. I mean, they had a very strong agenda, but, and this is how when it got tricky, the fact they were so good at it was that sometimes you cannot cover the Arab world if you are not taking into consideration the Al Jazeera coverage. I mean, the fact that they were the mouthpiece and they broadcast Bin Laden tape before 2 decades. The fact that some of the Hamas exclusive was on this channel. So I think that even if a lot of rightfully people say that it's not a trusted organization or broadcast, the Qataris had no reason to worry, because most of the Arab world, when they look from good coverage on Gaza or the Middle East, they're gonna go to Al Jazeera. I say even more. Al Jazeera was a thorn to Saudis and UAE and others, and in the blockade you mentioned before, from 2017 to 4 years later, one of the reasons was Al Jazeera. And their neighbors didn't like how they portrayed on this channel. But during this war, this current war, the attitude in the Arab street was more positive toward Al Jazeera, because we want to know what's happening in Gaza. and you are the main source of information. So this is why even a lot of people write when you cannot trust what's happening on Jazeera. There is no reason to be worried because most of the Arab world will continue to rely on these reports.
Another pillar of the Qatari soft power is in international institutions. How is that country influencing international institutions when we speak about WTO, when we speak about United Nations, UNESCO, and other, like GCC, those institutions? How Qatar is approaching those institutions in terms of soft power? And what can you say based on your research? How active is Qatar in those institutions?
I will answer with a weird case from 1967. After the Six-Day War in Israel, the Qatari administration was donate money to UNRWA and other organization, Palestinian organization, to the refugees. And we have the telegram, we have the report from the QRC, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that was worried that this Qatari movement or this Qatari agenda, it's a way to Qatar to become an independent state. Now, the independence of Qatar came 4 years later, but then the Qatari approach wasn't for that reason. Today, I can say that the UN, WTO, and this organization, it's a mechanism that allowed Qatar to present itself as a member that is promoting peace, tranquility, stability, and other objectives, and sometimes at odds with reality. But I think that if we talk about the fact that in the Middle East, Qatar want to present itself, or in the GCC, Qatar want to promote itself as unique in the international organizations such as the UN, Qatar want to establish itself as one of the pack. Qatar want to present itself as a reliable partner that you can trust them. And there was an example before a year, seems like a decade ago, there was demonstrations in Denmark and other places about Quran burning. And most of the Muslim leaders was against it, and they speak in harsh words, etc., as they expect. But the Qatari Emir in the UN chose to speak differently. He said in Arabic, although he has a great English, but still, he chose in Arabic, like he's doing always in international forums, to say we are more mature to respond these childish acts. So again, the Qatari Emir on the UN in Arabic, although most of the leaders speak in English, chose to say to the Arab world, we are the respected one. We need to take it as grown-ups do. And this is an example to the fact that Qatar want to present itself in the international arena, not the Middle Eastern one, as a reliable partnership, as a mature one that you can trust, you can rely, you can be in contact with for many political reasons. And this is how Qatar, as a small state, is crucial in the world affairs in this day and age.
I think it's very interesting that he speaks Arabic. I didn't know that. I missed that information because I heard him when he was in the European Union and he spoke English.
There was an article about the Arabization policies of Sheikh Tamim. It's a manner that's in internal pressure, the fact that Qataris became too much Western, alcohol, etc. I think that Arabic was one way of Qatar to say we didn't go too much far. we are still Arabs, we're still Muslims, we have strong identity, local identity, and the speeches in Arabic, as you say, it's not always. Like you said, in the UN, we can hear him in Arabic. In the EU, we didn't hear him in Arabic. But this is a way to Qatar to present itself as the state that promotes Arabian policies, Gulf policies, Islamic policies, and this is how they can explain to the local population and to the rest of the region, we are not neglecting our identity.
Ariel, we are recording this episode during Hamas-Israeli war, unfortunately. But on the other hand, Qatar is a significant player in negotiations. We read many articles about the Hamas and Qatar, Qatar-Israel, Qatar-United States, Qatar-European Union. So let's evaluate the role of Qatar during these conditions of war. How do you see the role of Qatar, and can we expect some, let's say, progressive results or outcomes? When we speak about Qatar, is Qatar capable to do more for the Israeli-Hamas conflict?
When we speak about the Qatari policy vis-a-vis Israel, we need to take into consideration two main objectives. First is how Qatar is presented worldwide or in the region. And the second one is how we present ourselves, the Qataris present themselves to the Palestinians. I think that we can see these two objectives in this current war in many ways, that Qatar tried to tiptoe between these, let's say, two aspects. If Saudi Arabia in the beginning of the war, October 8th, was more ambivalent, and there was an example even to one former official that even denounced Hamas. Qatar from the beginning say that Israel bear full responsibility, and this is one example to how Qatar positioned itself as a party or actor that was in favor of the Palestinian stance. And during this war, we can see the fact that it presents itself as the player that acts in the interest of the Palestinians in many realms. In interviews of the Qatari PM, he always mention what's happened in Gaza, but also in other places. The fact that Qatar supported Hamas and hosted Hamas, and during these days still doing it. But at the same time, they needed the international community, because sources at Doha said there was fear from international backlash toward Qatar. After all, the British Telegraph presented in the first day of the war a video that show how Hamas leadership monitor the first attack on Israel from Doha. So it makes sense that Doha fear from this kind of response. So this is why Doha cannot ignore the international community. So they use their strong connection to the Palestinians, to Hamas, to present itself as the one player that can bring peace and stability to the region. For an example, when Secretary of State Blinken, the American Secretary of State, came to Doha and held a press conference with the Qatari PM and Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Rahman Al Thani, he asked him to close the Hamas office in Doha. And the reason the Qatari PM refused was this is a way of communication to Gaza and to bring aid, etc., etc. And they even try to suggest that after the war gonna end, we are gonna close the offices. They not say that this way, they say it more ambiguously, more in a manner that the day after they can say, no, we didn't mean this way, and etc. But I think this is the tiptoe that Qatar always try to maintain, try to present itself as the protector of the Palestinians, but at the same time, make sure it's not gonna cost them. Because if these two objectives are gonna contradict itself, for an example, the fact that if Israel succeeded and to expel Hamas for good, I believe that Qatar gonna prefer the international community, or let's say the image of itself around the world, over the Palestinian one, because we didn't need to go far. You need to go to the Palestinians in Doha. In Doha, Palestinians are considered as foreigners, such as the British and the Americans and the French and the others, because when you speak about Qatar, at the end of the day, you talk about Qatar. They care about themselves, and it's okay because this is their state. But if they have let's say hesitation, if they need to support the Palestinians or the Qatari objectives, I think the Qatari objectives will win every day.
Ariel, the last question for today's interview. We mentioned many pillars of the soft power when it comes to Qatar. As a researcher, what would be your recommendation for our students, our viewers, to research about the Qatari soft power? Which areas would you recommend? Or maybe there are some areas which are a little bit under research, so you can mention those ones as well.
From scholarly perspective, I think that the sport region section is well analyzed, or let's say too much analyzed, because it makes sense. It's more appealing. But I think that one of the realms that we talked before, the real estate and infrastructure, needed more consideration. There is a lot to research on this subject, and there are many even news outlets they talk about that, but I don't think that there is enough sufficient scholarly articles and books that examine this realm. It seems, I guess, less appealing, so this is why, but I think it's not just symbolic, although symbols goes a long way in Qatar, but also a significant instrument for Qatar in not only in real estate, but also is relevant to other realms of influence of Qatar in the world.
Ariel, thank you very much for your time, for your insightful thoughts about this very interesting topic. And I think we went through many pillars of the Qatari soft power. So that's a quite nice explanation of how Qatar is positioning itself in the international relations. And also you made many comments that might be very interesting for research, for future maybe work of junior researchers, of my students or other students. So again, thank you very much for being on Ariel Thinker.